It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, and this is episode number 100 of Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. Episode 1 was King Kong 1976. Episode 50 was King Kong 1933. For this 100th episode, I kind of want to keep the big monkey thing going, but I also want to talk about a sort of cousin to Kong, and that's Mighty Joe Young. Interestingly, this is a reteaming of Ernest Schoedsack and Marion Cooper, as well as effects supervisor Willis O'Brien. So it's a lot of the same people still working on this type of movie and this type of idea. Now, O'Brien's protege during this time, or actually a little bit before this time, was Ray Harryhausen, and he performed a large number of the stop-motion animation sequences for this movie as well, because Harryhausen was kind of taking over for O'Brien, who kind of had to help sort out some other issues that was going on with the animatronic that was used for Mighty Joe Young. So special effects artists think that this is a spectacularly influential movie, with a few scenes in this film considered some of the best stop motion effects scenes ever made. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on, but they're right. There are some spectacular effects done in this movie, and if you think about it from a perspective of 1949, holy cow. This is just it's a really, really well-made movie. Now, and of course, it won the Oscar for visual effects for 1949, but back then, that award was given to the producer of the films, not the actual artist or the supervisors doing the effects. So Cooper, when he was presented the award, as thanks for what Willis O'Brien accomplished in this film, as well as for King Kong in 1933, Cooper gave the award to O'Brien to keep, because he was the one who made it work. I think it was kind of a way for Cooper to say, I can't take the credit for something that this guy did so well. Now, the film is not one that was initially super successful. Despite being influential, most of its acclaim came later. I mean, even critics were a little bit kind of lukewarm to it, I guess you could say. But at the time of the release, it ended up being a not insignificant failure, losing RKO something like $675,000, which is massive. And this was an expensive film, and they really kind of thought that kind of riding the coattails of this being the same people who made King Kong, and King Kong getting consistently released and re-released over the last 16 years, and being successful when it re-released, they really kind of thought that this would be kind of a shoe-in for success, but unfortunately it was not. But so significant were the effects, a year-long museum exhibit with lots of the behind-the-scenes artifacts and albums of photos that had like original art designs and a lot of behind-the-scenes photographs from the effects crew and so on. That was displayed in Wales from about 2017 to 2018. And maybe it wasn't that big of a deal at the time of its release, but its legend definitely grew over the years and the influence spread. And some people actually kind of think that this is a little bit better of a movie than King Kong was. I will say, and this is something that I have later on in my likes, there is absolutely a different feel to this movie. It's a lot of the same themes being presented in this movie that was presented in King Kong, but it's handled a little bit differently, and I can see why some people may think that this is a little bit better than that. That said, this film also has a pretty stellar cast as well. You have Ben Johnson, who later won an Oscar for The Last Picture Show. Terry Moore was an Oscar nominee for Best Supporting Actress, and just a few years later for Comeback Little Sheba. You have Robert Armstrong, who had been in King Kong and Son of Kong back in 1933. And then even the Big Ape gets credited as Mr. Joseph Young. they really was kind of, it was a little bit of a meta thing, but I mean, he was legitimately a creature creation by Willis O'Brien that, yeah, I guess he was kind of his own little actor in this movie. So what do we got in the movie? Well, we start in Africa in 1937, and there's a little 8-year-old girl named Jill Young who lives in this, it's kind of a ranch. Her father is living over in Africa for, I don't know if it's exploratory purposes or if there's some reason why he's there, but she sees a couple of native African guys walk by with this basket. And when she looks inside the basket, she asks if she can trade for whatever's inside there. And they kind of, they kind of like, yeah, sure, kid, whatever. And they kind of just appease her a little bit. But she does end up trading her father's prized flashlight for what's inside the basket. And what's inside the basket is an orphaned gorilla. And she names it Joe. And her father is not too pleased about Joe being around, but she's, swears to him that I'll take care of him. I just need a friend. She doesn't have any friends around because she's an 8-year-old little girl from America who is living in Africa, who doesn't really know the language at the time. There's not many other kids around. They also live in a relatively large piece of land. I think she ends up saying it's like a 5-mile radius around her ranch home. So it's a significant piece of land that her father lives on that she doesn't really have any other interactions with people. So he does eventually relent, and over time she begins taking care of it, realizes that Joe's favorite song is Beautiful Dreamer, and he always calms down whenever he hears it, or at the very least when he was a baby he goes to sleep while listening to it. But 12 years pass, and we meet promoter, club owner Max O'Hara, and that's played by Robert Armstrong. And he's looking for something big for his new nightclub in Hollywood. And he's planning on going to Africa, and I think the whole plan was for the place to be an African-themed club, because the idea was he wanted to go out and he wanted to wrangle some lions and basically have these lions behind this thought to be unbreakable glass at the club. Later, Joe proves it ain't so unbreakable. Meanwhile, there's a guy by the name of Greg Johnson, who's Ben Johnson, and he's introducing himself as a champion roper, and he always wanted to go to Africa. So he says, hey, take me with you, O'Hara. I got this, and I can help you out. So they plan on capturing some real African lions, and he doesn't want to buy one. His assistant, Wendy, he goes by the name Wendy. He says, well, Max, you can buy a lion. There's 100 lions you can buy in California. And Max is like, no, we got to go and capture them. And he wants to do that because he wants to tell a story. And during the course of the movie, or at least course of the scenes when they're in Africa at the beginning, he's talking about all these fantastical stories that he's sending back to the States of all the danger and trouble. And so he's doing this for hype more than anything. So they're planning on leaving pretty soon, but Max is like, I feel like I missed something. I feel like there's something more out here. And everybody begins hearing this bizarre roar. And what they find is this gigantic 12-foot gorilla who it gets his fingers nipped by one of the lions in the cage, and he starts going, ape. And he starts wrecking the whole place, and Max realizes, oh my God, this is a gigantic gorilla. We got to get this guy. We got to bring him back over to the States. He's our opening act. And so he sends out all of his cowboys. That was one of the things that he wanted to do when he left the States, was when he realized that Greg was this kind of roper and cowboy and stuff. It's like, well, I'll just bring all cowboys. It'll be one big adventure like it was the Great Frontier or something. So he sends all of his cowboys out. They chase down the giant gorilla, they corner him. The giant gorilla starts throwing everybody around, starts basically unable to be roped. And it's not until a grown-up Jill arrives to calm Joe down. And this is Joe all grown up. Why he's so big, it's never really explained. Doesn't really matter. But she calms him down, and Max realizes we gotta bring them both over, because she has this control over this ape in a way that I've never seen before. That would be great to do on the stage and everything. So he sends Greg to find her. They find where she lives, and Max just lays on the charm. It's like, oh, we can come over, you can be in Hollywood, we'll get you some really fancy clothes, you'll be famous, there'll be money, all of this and that. And she's kind of naive enough to kind of fall for it. She's very strong, and she's very forceful with these men that are messing with Joe, and she, is able to stand her ground by basically saying, you're on my property, get the hell out of here. And but she is still rather lonely. 6 months prior, her father passed away, so she really doesn't really have anybody except for a couple of workers. She's got, I think you only really see a maid that she has any contact with other than Joe. So she is kind of lured in by that, and they go over to Hollywood, and much like with King Kong, there's big pomp and circumstance about this act that's going to happen. And when they are ready to reveal Mr. Joseph Young of Africa, which is what the billboard says, and nobody knows what that is, but when they're about to reveal him for the first time, they bring Jill out. She sits down at a piano, starts playing Beautiful Stranger. Everybody kind of starts losing interest, like, what the hell is this? Max is off his rocker. And then all of a sudden, her part of the stage begins to rise, and when they put the spotlight on it, it's Mighty Joe Young, and everybody's excited and happy, and everybody loves it, and that first night is perfect. Well, cut to about 10 weeks later, we find out that Joe isn't eating so much. He doesn't like being caged, because they can't just let him roam free in Hollywood. And Jill can't even walk down the street without being harassed by people. Oh, you're the one with the monkey, and so on and so forth. And so she wants to go back home, and she doesn't like the fact that Joe is seemingly depressed as well. And Max is like, fine, that's fine, but let me find somebody to replace your act. And then 7 more weeks pass, and Joe is really depressed, and this time Greg has to step in and say, okay, well, Jill, I'll help you not let him talk you into staying again. We'll get you home. And she's like, hey, you want to come back with me? I kind of like you. And he's not entirely opposed to that idea, if you catch my drift. But unfortunately, during this time, while seemingly they're trying to figure out a way to get back to Africa, some drunks have been really been mean to people at the nightclub that night. They're throwing stuff at Joe. They pour their booze into the cigarette girl's cigarette cart that she's walking around with, because she won't sit with them or show them any affection, and so on and so forth. So they decide, because Max kicks them out of the club, that hey, we're gonna go find where that big monkey is. Who's he think he is to kick us out? We'll go and find the monkey and have our own show. And they get Joe drunk. And then they hurt him. And when they do that, he goes on a rampage. And he breaks the glass where all the lions are being stored behind the bar, and the lions are getting out and attacking people, and it's mayhem at this point. Well, the cops come with the intent to not just shoot the lions dead, but shoot Joe dead. So Jill has to say, hey, he's actually really friendly. We just want to go home. And the court's like, too bad. But Max has a change of heart, and he realizes that, well, you know what, maybe this is a little bit my fault here. So Greg and I have come up with this idea. We're going to steal Joe out of his cage, and then we're going to stow him away in a moving truck and then we're going to get him someplace where basically everybody can go back to Africa and everybody will be fine. Well, before they're able to really leave, they first get chased by the cops. Then they have to steal another truck so that they can get a little bit more disguise. But then they find out that that there's this orphanage on fire, and they have to basically risk their lives to save the kids that are still trapped in the burning building. At that point, it's revealed that, like, well, after this, I don't know if anybody's gonna okay the idea of euthanizing or shooting Joe. So they're able to basically get back to Africa, where everybody lives happily ever after. Max is still in the States, where he plans on starting another nightclub with another fantastical act of a bunch of women performing underwater, basically. He's back to his old tricks. Joe and Jill and Greg have gone to Africa, where they are living happily and everything is great. So let's talk about my three things here. First and foremost, the baby Joe Young is ridiculously adorable. How can we not love a baby gorilla? Every time you see him, especially when he's like falling asleep when she's playing the music box of Beautiful Dreamer, it's just adorable. But as with King Kong, this is a movie that kind of preys upon our kinship with primates. We feel sorry for them, right? It's very easy for us to be sympathetic for mammals in particular, more so than, say, like some of the kaiju, like in the Godzilla movies. I mean, if they didn't give Godzilla the personality they ended up giving him, be a little bit harder to sympathize with a giant lizard as it is with larger mammals, and in particular large apes, because we have so much in common with them. And we really don't like seeing monkeys or apes being harassed by the cowboys and getting roped, and we really don't like seeing them get exploited. As their act begins to age, you start seeing people start being much more like I was saying, the drunks were throwing things at Joe, and it just gets ugly after a while. And that's all helped by the fact that Joe Young has a much, much kinder face than King Kong did, and he's very expressive. So he almost he has a lot of human qualities, and he has a lot of young human child qualities. He gets mad, he gets disappointed, and it's really easy for us to identify with that character, and he's a very sweet character too on top of that. So yeah, we root for him throughout this movie, and he does end up becoming more of a hero, certainly more of a hero than King Kong was when he saves an orphanage or saves orphans out of a burning building. That's it's a pretty heroic thing, and you really sympathize with that. Second, there does seem to be a little bit more life to this movie than the King Kong movie. This is probably due to the time in which this movie came out. The movies of the earlier 30s were a little less vibrant, a little bit more quiet. They hadn't really, in every instance, figured out exactly how to use music to match what's going on visually. This movie does that a whole lot better. It also has a lot more comedic elements, like with the tall tales that Max is going to tell about capturing these creatures and making everything more exciting and sellable. You also have an act in that first night where he's lined up all of these strongmen to play tug of war with Joe, and all of his descriptions of them and how they are, and some of the catcalls that they get from the women in the audience it's pretty funny stuff. I mean, it's almost like this movie is almost written straight up as a comedy more than anything. Another thing, the film stock is really crisp and clear. The music, like I said, whereas the music wasn't used very well in the earlier sound films, this one, it's very, there's a lighter motif that kind of builds excitement, and it just feels livelier. The movie does feel a slight bit more kind-hearted than King Kong. Now, there is a caveat here. Whereas King Kong, Carl Denham never really learns a true lesson. I mean, he learns that, that Kong is a feeling creature, and he's kind of sad that he dies, and he's really sad for the Fay Wray character that she had to experience all of this, but he doesn't really feel sympathetic, and he doesn't really feel like a character who really learns his lesson or feels bad for what he's done. However, in this, Max has that change of heart where he realizes, I don't really want to take this girl for a ride. I don't really want to hurt this animal. I want to keep them for as long as I can so I can make money off of them. But he's not opposed to them ever going back to Africa, and he certainly has a change of heart to help them get away sooner than he probably would have. So, there is a little bit more kindness there. Now, the caveat here is that the theme of the nightclub is some casual 1940s racism for sure, and that causes a little bit of problems. There is also very interesting camera work in this movie that really helps with that as well. But third, I really like Terry Moore as Jill in this. She's really capable. She's independent. She's cute and lovable. She is a little lonely, like I said, which causes her to be easily swayed by Max to sign a contract to go to Hollywood. But it's no wonder why Ben Johnson's Greg likes her right away. It's because she's strong, but she also is a little inexperienced, and he really doesn't want to see her get taken advantage of. And on top of all this, the usage of Beautiful Dreamer is really key to Jill because of how she was brought up alone and in need of something like Joe and the adventure of going to Hollywood and so forth. It does, oddly, ultimately make Africa far more appealing at the end of this movie. It's not the dangerous place that people probably, particularly white people, probably thought in the 40s. All the fame doesn't compare to what she had back there. That's her home. And one more kind of bonus like here. Hey, it's my 100th episode, and it's my show anyway, so I can break the rules if I want to do more than 3 likes every now and then. But one of the things about this movie is, as I said earlier, it's very, very influential, particularly in the world of stop motion animation and visual effects of that nature. And one of the scenes that's most commonly pointed out is the scene that deals with Joe saving the kids from the burning orphanage. And absolutely, it is one of the most gorgeous uses of stop motion animation. But I would even argue that you can go before that to see really where that begins. Beginning with when they break Joe out and stash him in the moving truck to hightail it so that they can get back to Africa. Right from the beginning, that's where the stop motion animation becomes, just beautiful. There are things from cars being animated to pieces of that building that's on fire being animated. The way Joe is sitting in the back of the truck looks very lifelike and almost looks exactly like how a gorilla would be. But there's all sorts of stuff that begins from that point. And the amount of items that they animate, just in the car chase between the cops and Greg and Jill, to all the stuff that they animate at the fire and having to continue to have things interact with Joe as well, it's amazing. And they even animate, there's one girl in particular that Joe goes back for and almost dies to save, that when they get her to the ground, they animate a little girl so that she can stand in front of the burning building that's being rear projected. But then when a piece of that building starts to fall and it's going to fall on her, that little animated character can interact with Joe as he tumbles in to protect her. And it's amazing. And what's especially interesting was from the moment that they arrive at the orphanage to the end of that scene is also filmed with a red tint. So it looks like everything is burning. And this is a black and white movie. It's not a color movie, but for that one scene, you do have that red tint that really kind of exposes more of that fire glow. It's absolutely gorgeous. And it's most definitely something that is worthy of all the love that it gets. And that's the best way, I think, to wrap up this 100th episode of Monster Mondays here at FilmSeizure.com. Just a couple of things here. For those who've listened to all 100 episodes, I greatly appreciate it. This is something that format-wise, I wasn't exactly sure how well it was going to work compared to our regular show on Wednesdays, how it would work with my writing that I have on Fridays, a completely different style of stuff that I do with that compared to this, which is also different than what I do with Film Seizure. But I appreciate everybody who has taken the time each Monday to spend, 10 to 20 minutes with me as I ramble on about some monster movie and what are the 3 things I like about that movie, even if that movie stunk. So I appreciate that. I wasn't sure if I could get to 100 episodes. I wasn't sure. I mean, at one point I thought all I was ever going to end up doing was these Universal movies and Godzilla movies and all these other movies that I could do. Turns out that a lot of those movies in between are a lot more popular with listeners. So I appreciate people coming to hear what I have to say. So I want to put a bow on this episode. Again, thank you. I suspect that I will have at least 100 more episodes to do. So I'll keep doing them as long as people still like them. But don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on FilmSeizure.com, as well as other places where fine podcasts are found, like Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, all those places you can find us there. You can also hop on over to Facebook and Twitter to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. You can also check out new posts at my website, bmovieenema.com, each and every Friday. So, until next week, when I begin the next 100 episodes, stay spooky.